Greetings from Vienna. I would like to welcome you all, participants and speakers, to the second webinar organized within the framework of the Gender Equality Working Group for the G20 Interfaith Forum. Thank you for joining our webinar under the theme Intersectionality of Policy, Gender and Religion. My name is Dimitra Missira, and I'm working for CAICID International Dialogue Center at the Office of the Deputy Secretary General, where I am responsible for the External Relations portfolio. Today, I may say I feel privileged and proud that I have been tasked to moderate these webinar discussions to be delivered by distinguished and accomplished women leaders under my capacity as a member of the G20I Working Group on Gender Equality that initiated this webinar series. This event is a joint effort, and I'm cautious that a great deal of work has been done by the experts framing the Gender Equality Working Group. However, this event wouldn't be possible without the support of our key partners that we are honored to have them on board for a total of 3 webinar series that are taking place throughout the course of summer months, because our goal was to exchange insights and share knowledge before the actual Interfaith Forum that this year is taking place in Bologna, Italy, between 12th to 14th of September. Therefore, allow me to use this opportunity and thank our partners, namely ACWE, a common word among youth, the European Center for Religious Studies, the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, and Freedom Business Alliance. On an introductory note, and aiming to give you further background information about the Interfaith Forum, as we are aware, the G20 Interfaith Forum offers an annual platform where a network of religiously linked institutions and initiatives engage on global agendas, including also the Sustainable Development Goals. The goal of the forum is to contribute meaningful insight and recommendations that respond to and help shape the G20 summit and thus international policy priorities. This commitment to the 2030 global agenda has motivated the G20 Interfaith Forum to have a dedicated interfaith and working group on gender equality, aspiring to build on the SDG number 5, which is calling for the achievement of gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. The theme now of the webinar was inspired by the realization and fact that gender inequality remains one of the most pervasive forms of discrimination in peace, security, and development settings. We observe that human rights instruments are still subject to exceptions and reservations on political and legal level. Even though the past decades have given rise to new global politics of gender equality, and we have seen significant increases in women's representation at different levels, gender divisions of power have not relented. 40 years after the adoption of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, we witness that women's rights are being eroded. That erosion is often justified in the name of a return to traditional values. So a question that arises is how policy, gender, and religion influence each other and where progress is yet to be made. We built and we will focus our discussion around this question, but also today we will examine some of the key concepts critical to protecting and promoting women's rights, the efficiency of international norms and frameworks, and address challenges faced within the regions or the particular context of work of our distinguished speakers. The focus of this event is on women, but more than the focus on women is their celebration of their voices and their power through a women-dominated panel. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you our 3 inspiring speakers. We have the honor to have with us a major supporter of the G20 Interfaith Forum, who has been also leading, among others, and co-chairing the Gender Equality Working Group discussions. This is Audrey Kitagawa, who is also the president and founder of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation and president of the Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family. We are also fortunate to have with us among the leading female figures and experts in the African region, Dr. Fatiha Serour, co-founder of Justice Impact Lab, as well as member of the Africa Group of Justice and Accountability, AGJA. We are also particularly honored to interact today directly with one of the officials shaping the European Union international action in the area of gender equality, Virginia Manzitti, who is the head of the gender team in the Directorate General for International Partnerships of the European Commission. Let me reiterate that it is a pleasure to have the chance to interact with you under this particular setting, and I look forward to benefit from your insights. Now, before I give the floor to our protagonists, our speakers, I would like to invite all participants that they see the number is growing and growing, and this is very motivating, to write your comments and raise any questions you might have throughout the course of the webinar, because we are planning to have a dedicated time for Q&A, but also we promise that all your questions will be taken into consideration and responses by all speakers will be provided in written form on our blog following the event. I do encourage you to use this opportunity to interact with our key experts. And in the meantime, you can also comment on our social media and on Twitter using the hashtag #IFGenderEquality. I would like to start with the first question that will kick off our webinar. However, I want to set a kind reminder to our speakers that we have the limitation of 3 minutes per each question. I start now with my first question. Within your context of work, how systems, experiences of discrimination, and intersectional relationships have changed over time, and how effectively are gender equality instruments adhered in your context? If I may start with you, Audrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dimitra, for your introduction and for moderating this panel. You know, the importance of intersectionality in critical areas of concern is increasingly recognized as an important mechanism for the dilation of our lens of insularity and to broaden our perspectives to understand better the overlapping nature of issues. And it does allow us to better consider the context within which we are utilizing our own perceptual fields to better understand that these important issues do not arise in isolation, but are in fact deeply connected to each other within the totality of the whole of the society in which they arise, and in which gender and religion play important roles, which can often render the implementations of policies challenging. Overall, I would say that there has been an improvement on the levels of awareness and creation of those legal instruments that have expressed the importance of women's equal participation and recognition. And in addressing the regional context of the U.S. and the work of the UN, whose headquarters is situated right across the street from where I live in New York City, it is clear that the important legal instruments which have been established by the UN has set the bar for the creation of international policy with the important preamble to the UN Charter itself, which reaffirms faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women. And we also have the important Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which reaffirms the preamble to the UN Charter and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. And over the last 60 years, the Commission on the Status of Women has made significant achievements on raising awareness on the importance of gender equality and was instrumental in growing the international women's movement. And the influence has created improvements in some areas of gender discrimination, religion, and policy. And there have been reforms of discriminatory religious laws and efforts to use religious teachings to discourage gender-based violence. And some religious leaders have spoken against child marriages, and other leaders have committed publicly and collectively with other religious leaders to end female genital mutilation. And religious leaders have promoted nonviolent fatherhood, and religious actors are exposing the misconceptions about contraception and family planning and advocating for changes in national laws. However, with respect to the United States, and it is really the only developed country to have signed CEDAW but not ratified it. And also within the United States, it's probably the only industrialized country without paid family medical leave. And a report by the World Economic Forum on the 2020 Global Gender Gap evaluated 153 countries on progress towards equality in terms of education, health, economic opportunity, and political empowerment. And the US is in a disappointing 53rd place. In the United States, gender instruments are not properly in place to support women and girls, including with regard to sexual violence. So there is much work that still needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, for your intervention and reminding us on key issues that are faced in the US. I would like now to give the floor to Fatiha, please, on the same question.
Thank you very much, Dimitra. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Working Group on Gender Equality for choosing such a challenging and interesting subject matter, and for inviting me to speak, or at least to share some of my experiences. So I'd like to thank Audrey because she set the scene that the international gender equality texts and commitments and resolutions have set out, and myself having been based in New York and contributing to Beijing +5, +25. I will not say any more on those things. I'd like to maybe say 2 or 3 things about the region, which is Africa. And in saying that, I'd like to remind ourselves that the intersection between, for me at least, gender equality, policy, and religion cannot be dissociated from women's rights as a basic right, as a basic human right. In other words, that we're trying to make sure that at all times, all these things which are at interplay actually do not forget the importance of women's rights as a basic human rights. So when I look at the African context and from experience, I think it's very important to distinguish that in Africa, we have got the northern part and the rest of Africa. Why do I say that? Basically, if we look at North Africa, there are 2 factors that actually affect women's or gender equality. Number 1 is the interlink, is the interconnectedness between religion, Islam being a religion of state in all of the Maghreb, Mauritania, Mali, and so on, and political decision making. So what we find in those countries is that you have, on one hand, civil law that guides a number of things, and yet, like marriage and family is guided only by Islamic law. And that's a very important thing that we do not find in the rest of Africa. The second thing, sadly, is that social practices are still deeply ingrained in the patriarchy system. So you may find the best educated gentlemen and ladies, and yet when it comes to the relationship, it reverts back to conservative attitude. So what do we have then when we look at Africa overall? I would say that we have a mixed picture about the adherence to the gender equality instruments. I'm referring obviously to the international one. So you can see that some countries, and I would cite Rwanda, Namibia, Botswana, and so on, they have done extremely well. When you think that Rwanda has got 50-50 in the highest political level, it gives us a sense of how that is working. Other countries, such as Somalia, Sudan, Ethiopia, they revert back to the issue of how do you manage, number one, religion, Islam, number two, the social practice of tribal and clan systems, and number three, civil law, which means that overall, the progress for gender equality has remained actually quite slow and difficult. And I speak about my latest post in Somalia, where we had a lot of issues there. So I would say that recently, as Audrey was saying, there's been quite good progress in relation to some implementation of things like CEDAW, for instance, or other international instruments. And I would say that in Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, although they had a lot of reservations about certain articles in CEDAW, they have changed that recently. So there's been progress in relation to Le Code de la Famille, which is family law. And I would cite, for instance, Algeria, which had big reservation, that they have lifted the restriction on or reservation on women being allowed to give their nationality to their children or their husbands if they are foreign born. And that was not possible, say, 5-10 years ago. So I think when we look at the gender equality framework on the continent, and I'm speaking about Africa, one would say that the test in the pudding is in the eating. In other words, for me, we have a lot of policies, we have a lot of resolutions, etc., but implementation itself is the biggest issue, either because of social resistance, lack of political will, certain type of interpretation of religious texts, and I'll come back to it when we come to the second question, and broadly, the limited resources made available for gender equality to progress. So progress, yes, much more to do on the continent. And thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Fatiha, for framing the context of the African region. I would like to give the floor now to Virginia to conclude with the first round of questions. Thank you.
So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks a lot for inviting me. So I will speak now on my work. So I work for an international organization for the European Commission. I'm based in Brussels. I lived 10 years in Africa and went around a bit. So I will speak on EU policy in EU external relations. So not on the European Union itself, but on how gender equality and women empowerment are now a core priority for EU external action. So, and I will try to bring in the issue of religion there. In fact, since 1.5 years, I'm working on gender, but before I was working on freedom of religion or belief, and I had the opportunity to dig a bit into how religion and human rights cross together. So since the new commission is in place, since our president, Ursula von der Leyen, has took the lead, there is really a rising interest, not only on gender equality, but on equality at large. So we really feel it from inside. There is an impetus on working on equality. There is many initiatives, many political products coming out. For the first time, we really seriously work on anti-racism, including inside our offices and system. We work on disability, on LGBTIQ, on Roma strategy. So I feel that there is really a political will to be consistent and to address intersectionality and inequalities in a broad sense. When it comes to gender, the first step of the Commission has been to develop a gender equality strategy to frame the work of the Commission for the next 5 years, recognizing intersectionality as one of the main principles, and also recognizing that the famous gender mainstreaming, which has been, I would say, contested, criticized, but still brings a lot of hope, should be really boosted, and seriously so. So we are now mainstreaming, and I'll tell you really seriously, whatever we do. So with this mainstreaming imperative in place, we have a new gender action plan for EU external relations, which was adopted in November. So this is a communication, which for us is the highest level of document. So it's really a policy, and it applies to whatever we do in Africa, Northern Africa, Central Asia, Middle East, Asia, and Latin America, Central America. So it's a huge scope, I think 140 countries. It comes with a strong engagement on investing politically and operationally on gender equality. So it comes with, I would say, power. Political power, so dialogue and commitment, but also funds, action, operation, and with concrete targets. So the policy recognizes intersectionality as one of the fundamental principles. So we are really serious about looking at how different discrimination and different identities intersect. And it comes with recognition of the importance of religion. So it states clearly that the EU will cooperate and mobilize religious actors for gender equality. It quotes the Faith for Rights Initiative, which for us is quite an important framework to cooperate with religious actors. And it was developed on the basis of a broad consultation. So the consultation with stakeholders around the globe showed that the priority number one of our work in gender equality should be to address the soft dimension of inequality, so social norms, prejudice, stereotypes. And so this was for us a call for action and a call to take it seriously, and so to engage more around religion and with religious actors. I will speak later on the fact that this engagement around religion is not easy for an international organization. So we have already a policy somehow backing us, but still, again, implementation is not so natural and not so easy. The new policy comes also with a novelty, which is lead by example. So this means that we should look at ourselves, introspection, how we are playing the equality commitment inside the house, and so also in managing our relation. I think this is very important for, I mean, being more self-aware and more, I would say, self-critical. And there are a lot of barriers still in the system, which we need to address and put our house in order also when working in an external relation. What's happening now I think it's interesting for you to know that now the implementation of the policy is full speed, and we really see it's impacting. So there is a programming process defining how to spend international partnership funds in the next 7 years. And we really see much more gender mainstreaming than before. Our target is that 8.5 action out of 10 will have a significant impact on gender equality. And in each country, we will have a big program. We hope big, but we have a program targeting only gender equality. So this should generate a lot of, I would say, positive energy around the agenda. And in each country, we will have a country level implementation plan. So a strategy coordinated with member states and with other stakeholders, UN and other international organizations, based on consultation with gender machinery, actor, stakeholder, to define our priorities. So this, we hope, would be in a way a platform for a more strategic engagement coordinated with other actors, and also to work together jointly for, I would say, political and operational engagement. I think I will stop here.
Thank you, Virginia, for the very promising information you shared with us about the action of the EU towards that particular area. I am very happy to see that this is a very wonderful start for the session, and I see that you partly already covered some of the questions raised in the Q&A. If I may summarize, I see, so that we can smoothly go to the next question, we can have a common agreement that for the regional context that you summarized and the organizational aspect of moving forward in that area from the EU perspective, we see that the political will is a very important aspect, the social systems, and of course, civil law and religion play a very important role that sometimes might be a barrier, sometimes it might be a good way forward. So with this, I would like to move to the next question that is linked to the role of religious actors in such processes. So if I may start, how religious actors, faith-based and secular organizations could contribute in gender equality issues, and what challenges have you encountered in your work so far? Dear Audrey, I would like to start with you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dimitra. You know, there are many ways that religious and faith-based actors can contribute to gender equality issues, as well as ways to work in collaboration with each other and other secular organizations as well. And religious organizations should really expose the misinterpretations or distortions that perpetuate the historically patriarchal systems of religious organizations and institutions. And religious and faith organizations can also promote women's leadership. Women's participation as leaders is essential on all levels, including the grassroots level. And people who understand their community and are part of its experience will know how to serve its needs and provide valuable insight into what changes need to occur. And religious communities can address issues like sexual violence in their sermons, publications, and dialogues, and provide support for victims and expand the conversation that also include the LGBTQ communities. And they can also correct the misconception that religion sanctions, for example, female genital mutilation. And religious leaders can stop performing marriage ceremonies involving children, and they can reinforce the religious views of safeguarding children. Feminist, secular, and religious actors can build partnerships with one another, and this collaboration will certainly help the general knowledge base of each group in how to challenge patriarchal norms within cultures and legal frameworks. And these partnerships can help bridge the international agenda and decision-making with the actual realities of the lives of women and girls. Men and boys can also be engaged as promoters and beneficiaries of gender equality. And religious and faith advocates who promote women's rights should be supported in their effort to change policies. And humanitarian actors should support youth faith advocates as well. And religious and faith advocates should also build stronger relationships with member states and collaborate with civil society constituencies. And female religious leaders that support gender equality can create those platforms that represent diverse faith traditions and geographic regions. And we need to commit to understanding, collecting, and analyzing more data in various intersections to more thoroughly understand how women are affected by various areas of society. And these are just some ways to address gender equality, and all religious and secular actors and advocates in every area of society have to promote and protect women and girls. And with respect to my own challenges, I've encountered as I traveled to certain countries, some of the most sacred religious sites are off limits to me because I am a woman. And some places had ropes to mark off where women had to sit so many feet behind the ropes as not to taint the sacred icon or relic with their close presence. And interestingly, even if the entire temple was dedicated to a goddess, women could not approach or tend to the goddess at all. And I observed that only the male priest could tend to the goddess, even when I asked the male priest, and when I asked the male priest, why are only male priests able to tend to the female goddess? I was told it was because women are unclean and impure. So these challenges that I have experienced and witnessed demonstrate that religious communities and organizations can themselves be obstacles to women's rights and access to sacred places in their own places, communities of worship. And they must change many of the attitudes and practices on the ground to support women in their communities and in society. And that's very important to do.
Thank you, Audrey, also about sharing this personal story. I would like to give the floor now to Fatiha on the same question.
Thank you very much, Dimitra. And again, thank you, Audrey, because you have outlined many of the elements I wanted to raise. So I'd like maybe to focus on one element you also referred to, which is if we look at the role of religious leaders in relation to gender equality or progressive progress for gender equality, as well as other groups, I think we have to remind ourselves, first of all, that all the texts, the religious texts we have remained the domain of men, number one, whether it's in the mosque, the church, the Buddhist temple, etc., etc. And let me speak about Islam. The explanation or the clarification of what the text in the Quran mean in reality is also made by the religious leaders who are generally, with due respect to our colleagues men, is generally male dominated. So to me, that is the first element, which is the human element. You have a text, but you explain it with a certain perspective. And in my view, it's done with the male perspective, a perspective that doesn't really consciously or unconsciously, let me be kind to them, doesn't want to acknowledge that we women are born and will die equal and should live equal. That is number one. And that as such, we are entitled to a share of political power as well as public space. So to me, the first issue that we need to look at if we want to support precisely and encourage the role of religious leaders which could be pivotal, that as you said, and is critical, as you said, Audrey, we need to look at that. And you have also said that. So one way of doing it in connection to the text is whether there is a possibility to work with them for quote, quote, an adaptation of those explanations. I'm not saying one changes the Bible or the Quran, but one looks at it within the context, which is the modern context, where men and women are both playing a very strong, important, critical public role. And I think it's feasible. This is one of the things that I think we should do. And both religious leaders and secular organizations should come together. And this is where the challenge I have seen so far is that very often, and I think you alluded to that, Virginia, very often they don't come together. And they don't come together because on both sides, there is a lack of trust. Religious leaders don't trust civil society, or women-led organization, or feminist groups, and the reverse is that maybe us feminist leaders or civil society groups, we're uncomfortable about having a dialogue. And that's where I think it's very important that we encourage dialogue, we encourage communication so that we identify the mutual benefits of gender equality for all in society, whether you are men, women, young child, LGBT, etc., etc. That equality will actually have a positive impact on all. And this is where we need to address the challenge. I'll close here at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatiha, for reminding us about the importance of dialogue and the mutual benefits of gender equality if we bring together a secular and faith-based organization, and the need to build trust and move towards adaptation of text. So you gave us a very positive message that it's change is doable, even in that challenging particular area. So Virginia, now the floor is yours for the same question.
Yes, thank you very much for having preceded me in already, I must say, elaborating on the many possible spaces and contribution which could come from religious actors for gender equality. This reminds me of a broader conversation with the contribution of religion and religious actors to sustainable development in general and to human rights in general. But when we talk gender equality, it becomes even more complex and delicate. So the conversation is already delicate, but gender equality is where you really put the finger where it can hurt. And this is why I think it's interesting, no? Because if we solve it there, then we open up a huge potential for more collaboration and for bringing together constituencies which are too distant and too far apart so far. I've been trying to help this dialogue, to help this connection since a number of years in my work. We realized that there is a lot of interest, personal interest. So many colleagues are keen and curious, and they realize that in many countries, you cannot work development, talk development if you ignore religion. So religion is everywhere where we work. But how to do it? So we realized that it was important to help them somehow do it in an informed and I would say safe way. There are risks in engaging with faith-based actors for international organization, which should be somehow acknowledged, recognized, and managed. So what are these risks? These risks are about maybe partnering with an actor and then discovering he has a policy or a statement on LGBTIQ, which are really against our online and human rights standard. You might find that they are funded by partners that you don't like, or that they discriminate against other religious groups. So there are plenty of risks we should be aware of. For that reason, we developed some guidance on engaging with faith-based actors. And it has been a very interesting process in-house to develop this guidance because it allowed a conversation which was absolutely necessary. So we put forward a number of concept definition, we clarified who is who, and I think interesting, some guiding principle for engagement. So these guiding principles are about the fact that when engaging with faith-based actor, the line should be always to advance human rights and sustainable development with a direct or indirect contribution. So a way to go forward in some difficult areas is to work through issue-based partnership and alliance. So you agree that you do not agree on everything. You agree to disagree on some issue and to focus your partnership on a given objective, which could, for example, be gender-based violence. It's also important, this is also very important to build trust, as was mentioned now, and to learn to talk to each other. So to learn the language of the other and to get to know each other. Another guiding principle is about diversity and inclusion. So when we engage with faith-based actors, we should be mindful of inclusivity. So we should be really careful that women are always included, that all groups are there, and if possible, whenever possible, privilege an interfaith space. So do not insulate one group, and to open it up to the rest of civil society. We should cultivate respect and openness, so respectful language, but also we as EU, we should always be explicit about our values, of course, in a respectful manner. And of course, we can adapt our language, the way we express ourselves, but without watering down our commitment to the human rights agenda. And then when it comes to funding, there we need criteria, not only guiding principle. And so we, of course, we need to check that we engage with actors who are committed to all human rights, committed to basic principle of gender equality. And okay, we can understand that these actors may not explicitly agree or actively advocate on all, but at least they should not speak out against. So we worked out a kind of compromise, which might be very helpful for concrete commitment on the ground. We have a huge amount of experience already on working with faith-based actors, for example, around gender-based violence. Under the Spotlight initiative, we have done a lot. We are trying to take stock of our experience and to draw some lesson and the line. I don't know, Dimitra, if I'm talking too much, you tell me if I'm going beyond my frame.
If we can summarize so that we can move to the third and last question, but I cannot interrupt you, Virginia, because what you shared is very useful actually from an institutional perspective. So I see Audrey and Fatiha agreeing as well. So
thank you. Now, very, very quickly. So when we engage with religious actors, there are plenty of lessons learned that we can really use as a compass. So for example, be careful and mindful of the importance of leadership. But I feel it really in the work I do. If we need leadership, religious leadership, to be aware of our engagement, but we need to open it up. And we need to be mindful that our engagement with religious actors can create, I would say, tension with other actors in civil society. So gender advocates, so we feel it. So they might feel betrayed. Or, what's going on? The EU is cooperating or partnering with actors which are male-dominated, which are also somehow part of a problem. So we need to balance our engagement also in an open way. So also engage with women organizations, with CSO, so not to somehow compromise or not to feel we are going too far in a relationship which might seem or be badly interpreted. And that's why we are really convinced that interfaith engagement is essential, because if we go into an interfaith space, we are already more or less on a safer space. And I think this transparency of engagement is essential. We should never partner with one group alone where different groups are present, and be very careful on selecting our partners, because some of the one or might be the most interesting and effective are the ones that are less visible. We have plenty of examples of positive engagement. I will speak on it later, but I will stop here now.
Thank you very much, Virginia. What I take are some key words: transparency, inclusivity. You reminded us also how important is the power of words in such a sensitive sector, actually. And we look forward after this webinar to do our homework and dive into further the guidance that you refer to on engaging with faith-based actors. And I would like to move to the third and last question of this webinar. However, I would like to ask you, if possible, to stay into the time limitations as we have only 15 minutes for closing this webinar. So one of the purposes of why we're here today is to inspire. And by inviting you, these three female women leaders that you are already quite inspirational and you give us a lot of information already, we would like to inspire us more by sharing some solutions. So my last question is, what combination of policies, practices, laws, or conditions need to be in place to create enabling environment for women empowerment with transformative effects for societies and gender equality politics from the intersectional perspective you have presented today? So I would start again with Audrey. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitra. Now, to foster an environment for women's empowerment, we really must challenge and change society's patriarchal attitudes and see the benefit to society in our own lives to have the equal participation of women in all realms of society, the political, social, institutional work, as well as family. And the national laws and policies should align with international humanitarian frameworks. For example, nations can implement laws and policies that criminalize domestic violence, protect victims of trafficking, and actually implement measures to protect women from sexual violence, especially in conflict zones. And UN Resolution 1325 reaffirms the importance of women's equal participation and full involvement in all efforts for the maintenance and promotion of peace and security. And it also calls on all parties of conflict to take special measures to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, particularly rape and other forms of sexual abuse in situations of armed conflict. And it is also essential to understand that promoting women and girls to help everyone, men included, and that gender equality is key to reaching all of our sustainable development goals. Because we can't marginalize women who are half of the world's population and think that we can make meaningful progress in addressing our global challenges without them. So women are the powerful agents of transformation for the 21st century, and it is time that we acknowledge that fact. And all people and institutions have to examine their attitudes towards women. Today, the topic involves the intersectionality of policy, gender, and religion, but religion does not hold a monopoly on patriarchal views. And we need to understand our own unconscious biases as well. And the perceptual views and mindsets of individuals arise out of the cultural and societal context in which we live. So the willingness to develop awareness and to change to become better persons really begins right where we are. And we each have personal responsibility and collective responsibility to make positive changes here and now. Now, I wrote a blog for the Viewpoint section under gender equality of the G20 Interfaith Forum, which I would like to share with our audience in relevant part, which says, the dynamics of power in our relationships are reinforced and perpetuated by the cultural, historical, and institutional contexts in which they arise. In short, wherever people engage with each other, power dynamics run through all relationships and need to be understood as a fundamental component that can create, when used negatively, marginalization and oppression, an establishment of dominance over another as a statement of superiority, privilege, and elitism over the other. And it can also create, when used positively, a self-empowerment and wholesomeness that speaks to one's own good self-esteem that can be inclusive, engaging, and welcoming of others, ever seeking for the other to realize the fullness and beauty of his or her own potential. The holder of primary power is therefore making more of a statement and broadcasting for good or for ill about him or herself rather than about the other. And it is therefore my fervent hope that each of us will remain vigilant about what we are broadcasting about ourselves and who we are by how we treat others. And in the field of our unified consciousness, we must come to realize that the other is myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. An inspiring quote that I'm taking out of this discussion is how you describe women as agents for transformation. So, Fatiha, what do you have to add in the question that was raised?
Wow, thank you very much. How can I add anything more interesting than what Audrey said? I'm not saying I will, but 2 or 3 things. Number one, really, if we want to create this enabling environment, and I know we've been saying enabling environment since Beijing, I think unless stakeholders come together, share the same vision and the approach to gender equality, we will still be fighting about who does it and who doesn't do it. I think that's very important. And I will endorse precisely what Virginia was saying in relation to the complexity of engaging with faith-based organization and religious leaders, not only because it's difficult to do that, but also about how it is interpreted, yet they are crucial. So I would add there that the communication is very important. So it is important to have an all stakeholder approach at the national level where the dialogue is critical and needs to be prepared, need to be followed, need to be nurtured, and needs to be monitored. And so I'd like to give maybe 1 or 2 examples, at least from my own experience of women, peace and security and the context. When I was in Somalia, obviously under my responsibility, I had the protection resolution of both women as well as children. And there was a lot of sexual violence, in particular by the peacekeepers. Forget about the rest. And so the only way I could approach that was by negotiating with the general in charge of the peacekeepers so that in his military order to his soldiers, there is a provision about, should you do this, you will be penalized, right? About women and about children, which was a very, very important thing. And I think it helped us promote the safety and the protection of women and children. The second example I would like to give is twofold, is Afghanistan. I know it's not Africa, but number one, in the late 1990s, when the Taliban were very powerful and in charge, it was very difficult to have a conversation with a Taliban leader or whatever about women having access to education. And although I was scared to death, it was one issue that I raised with the second in command. And what helped me was to pick up a line from the Quran and to say, you cannot close schools because this is what the Quran says about girls' education. And it worked. And the second example, in 2002, when I was part of the UN mission, the power of explaining what CEDAW means in a context like Afghanistan, because in the beginning they were totally against it. And I remember as a gender advisor to the Mr. Brahimi at the time, I trained judges and lawyers on CEDAW. I trained the police academy and many other institutions. And guess what? In 2002, Afghanistan surprised us all by signing and ratifying CEDAW without reservation. So there are good examples there, and we just need to support and replicate similar kind of activities. And I close here because obviously time is quite short. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatiha. You reminded us how important it is to create an enabling environment, bring all actors together, move forward on cultivating dialogue, and actually how education is such a key and powerful tool. I would like to give the floor to Virginia, but I would like to remind you we have only 5 minutes before we close, so if we can stick to the 3 minutes, it would be appreciated.
So Dimitra, stop me if I go beyond, please. No, I just thanks a lot for Audrey and Fatiha. I really appreciated your comments. I mean, I wanted to share some practical example, but I would like to start by saying that there is a key element in this combination of policies, practices, and laws, which is leadership, and we really believe that gender responsive leadership is very essential, and it starts from introspection and from self-consciousness and from self-discovery. So we are starting a journey on this, and we feel it's really time for it. There is, I think, something in the air which open the mind and the hearts of our managers and leaders, and I think that something is happening very subtle, and we all need that. We need to change, and there is some readiness to change in the air. So this is my optimistic outlook. In order to show you some example on what's going on under the spotlight. The spotlight is a huge operation funded by the EU and implemented by the UN in 25 countries on gender-based violence. 500 million euro. So really a lot of action initiative and a lot of cooperation and partnership with religious actors. So I would really like to share maybe after some experience and concrete example of cooperation under the spotlight. The spotlight applies a comprehensive approach. So we really believe that there is a theory of change behind any successful intervention. And there are a number of pillars which should be addressed if we want lasting results. So work on the legal and policy framework, support institution, work on prevention, work on access to services, and work on networking of different type of actors, CSO, innovative partnership, including with faith-based organization. And under each one of these pillars, there are experience of cooperation with religious actors, which are quite interesting. I would pick one which is really speaks to what has been just said. So it's really having experience in holding conversation, difficult conversation, maybe, with traditional and religious leaders. This has happened in many countries like Malawi, Mali, Mozambique, Samoa, with thousands of influencer decision makers, including religious and traditional leaders, being involved. And with concrete results, like in Malawi, 200 religious leaders were engaged as champion and stopped hundreds of marriages of young girls. We have also a huge campaign, television, radio, social media campaign in Mali, where Christian and Muslim leaders spoke on the need to stop gender-based violence. And this had an immediate effect on access to essential services. So there are plenty of these experiences which show that it's important to engage, but within a comprehensive approach, within a theory of change. So it's not enough to do one sole action, and you need long-term engagement. So you need to start from opening a conversation, leaving the space for religious actors to feel they are expected, they are not instrumentalized, they have space to think over it, to find their own way, and to negotiate in their own constituency. Because this is not an area which we should forget. Everything is moving. And so religion is very moving at high speed in all directions. So sometimes also very regressive, fundamentalistic. There are many openings, but so nothing is, how do you say, fixed these days. So I think that time for reflection and action is essential. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginia, for closing this webinar under this note. We look forward to dive into the Spotlight initiative. I would like to thank you, all of you who joined us today, but I personally hope that you're leaving this meeting as inspired and motivated as I do. Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A, but as promised, we will write back to you in written form in our blog. The event was developed to share knowledge on how we can advance and empower women and promote the vision of gender equality. And although I'm biased, I definitely believe that we achieved our goal today. I'm grateful for the thoughts and insights that were shared by all distinguished speakers, and what a great resource of information. Thank you very much. Speaking on behalf of the Gender Equality Working Group, I would like to reassure you that all the information you shared today will be immensely helpful for us, both on formulating the final recommendations that we fit into the G20 summit, but also for our continued work in this particular area. I would like to highlight a few of the key messages that I particularly take away from this webinar, which is to value diversity as an asset, see how traditional, cultural, but also religious values and norms is doable to adapt and transform. And a proof is already this panel that we have in front of us today. And also see the transformative power of dialogue and women. There is an ethical imperative to move from theory into practice and move towards a more rights-based approach. Now, on a more practical note, and as mentioned earlier, the webinar series organized under the Gender Equality Working Group are in total 3. The first webinar discussions were held earlier in July under the theme, The Impact of COVID-19 on Women, and are already available on G20i blog and YouTube channel. The next and last one, organized by the particular Gender Equality Working Group, is taking place on 17th of August, and the topic is Made in the Image of God, the role of sacred text in helping or hindering gender equality. We hope that we will see you at the next webinar, and until then, stay safe, healthy, and brainstorm on all the speeches and insights that you heard today by our inspiring speakers. Thank you, all of you who have been part of the interfaith journey today and for being able to attend this meeting. I'm wishing you all the best from Vienna. Bye.